podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to a new podcast, The Paddock and the Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
Hello everyone. The flat season is now getting into full swing. And on today's podcast, I have gone across the Atlantic to talk about the Kentucky Derby. They have had snow there earlier this week, which is due to be run on Saturday the 1st of May. My guest today is Jay Hovdey, an award-winning American journalist and national columnist for Blood Horse Magazine and Blood Horse Daily, who has written 4 books on racing, including one on Cigar, the first winner of the Dubai World Cup. Jay also serves on the nominating committee for the Thoroughbred Racing Hall of Fame and is married to the retired Hall of Fame jockey Julie Crone. I hope you enjoy today's podcast with Jay and find out more about the Kentucky Derby. Hello, Jay. Thank you for being our first American guest on the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate it, and it's an honor.
Well, I've spoken to cricketers in Barbados, and I've spoken to a racing trainer in Sydney and another cricketer in Sydney, but it's our first venture into California. How are you today, Jay?
Wonderful. Getting excited about the Kentucky Derby and Triple Crown season coming up, and trying to pay a little bit of attention to the overseas action as well. But we have an interesting Triple Crown season upon us.
Well, that's what we're going to principally talk about today, the Kentucky Derby. I must get that right. But how has the pandemic affected a leading horse racing journalist over the last 12 months?
Well, it is always dependent upon the local conditions. I mean, the United States being so vast and unwieldy that the restrictions and rules on access to horses and trainers and the racing itself has been dependent upon the local authorities. In New York, for instance, pretty well early on in the summer season, the journalists and agents and that sort of thing were allowed on the backstretch under certain strict protocols of health and masking. But in California, we've been excluded, we being journalists and the general media, have been excluded from access to the stabling and that sort of thing from the very beginning. So I haven't touched a horse in some time. It's been it's been no fun. They did open up the racing to media midway through last year so that we could, with special permissions, attend the racing. But that's a bit sterile, and we're doing a lot of work by telephone and relationships away from the track. So it's been difficult for those of us who really like to get our hands dirty on the backstretch and get to have closer personal relationships with the people involved. But racing has gone on, which we must be thankful for, and we can't complain otherwise.
Well, thank you for that. It's been the same here. We've been lucky to actually be able to watch the racing, which began here back on June the 1st. So we've basically had uninterrupted coverage since then. But today we're going to talk about the Kentucky Derby, the history of the race, traditions, famous winners, and what makes the Kentucky Derby so special as a horse race and for Americans?
Well, it's certainly the most hyped race, heavily promoted race in the world that ever was. Let's face it. It's synonymous with horse racing in the farthest corners of the world. I would think that the race itself is distinctive in its distance and its timing. A May race where some of these horses aren't even a full 3 years old yet physically. But from the standpoint of just general interest, we seem to focus on the Kentucky Derby more than any other horse race, simply because of the momentum of history and the great. We're approaching the 147th running, which I know is kind of a drop in the bucket compared to your Derby, but still it's the longest running major race in this country, rivaled only by races like the Travers and the Belmont Stakes.
Yeah, I see. You're a bit behind us. We got underway in 1780.
Yeah, well, you had to do something after independence. You had to. You didn't have us to kick around anymore, so you just started your Derby.
And I read that in the States, it's known as the most exciting 2 minutes in sport.
Yeah, that's and again, it's part of the hype, part of the advertising genius of the people that are behind it. I would imagine you'd get some arguments from anyone who watched some of the great Tom Brady go through the last 2 minutes of any Super Bowl that he needed a touchdown, or the last 2 minutes of any encounter between say Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. But yes, for a sporting event that takes only 2 minutes of your time to appreciate, it's pretty intense, and you do tend to hold your breath for 2 minutes.
And Her Majesty the Queen was there in 2007, I read.
I didn't see her, but I heard she was in the house. There was probably about 150,000 people there. We've seen all manner of international celebrities turn up for the Derby. I passed by presidential candidate George W. Bush on the back stairs heading to the press box one day. You name it, and someone has shown up. I believe Richard Nixon was the first sitting president to attend a Kentucky Derby way back in the late 60s or early 70s. So from that standpoint, if a particular head of state feels like they could use a little visibility, the Kentucky Derby is perfect.
Well, the race was first run, I looked up, in 1875, and until 1896 it was run over 1.5 miles. But now, of course, you're over 1 mile and 2 furlongs, 2,000 meters to the American listeners. And a question that's probably very straightforward, but I'm sure you'll have no trouble in answering, is why was it first run on dirt and not on turf?
Well, the only grass racing they had then was out in the field. Turf courses were not used to any extent in America until well into the mid 20th century. Every race course of note was of tilled and groomed soil of some kind or another. And they did this basically for convenience. You could maintain a level of consistency. You didn't have to worry about deep ground or torn grass or things like that. So it became just a matter of maintenance and convenience that dirt racing evolved in this country. And for better or worse, the breed in this country followed along. The foot, the stride, everything that goes into a horse handling one surface or another began to lean very heavily toward handling a groomed dirt surface. And so here we are today, of course, now over the last 40 or 50 years have become more citizens of the world in terms of the racing, and we've had to either accommodate grass horses from abroad coming to America, or develop our own, who could, to one extent or another, travel and act on grass.
And it's known the Run for the Roses. Can you explain why it's called the Run for the Roses? Well,
that's probably some deep Kentucky tradition, that the red rose is a flower of significance. Each of the 3 Triple Crown races has their own flower. They have their own songs. They've been changed through the years. They create their own sort of culture from that standpoint. The red rose is coming into bloom, of course, in May, the warmer weather in the climes of the Midwest. My roses are starting to pop out a little earlier here. We've had a warm early April, so you never know where roses will show up. At the Preakness, they've got a kind of an inconvenience. Their black-eyed Susan is their flower of choice, but black-eyed Susans don't start to bloom until much later on. So they have to take daisies and color the center black. It's been kind of a running joke for many years. And of course, white carnations signify the Belmont Stakes. And that's a particular favorite in our house because my wife, being the retired Hall of Fame rider Julie Crone, won her Triple Crown event in the Belmont Stakes and still has one of the dried white carnations displayed in our home.
And it's a big fashion day as well, isn't it, the Kentucky Derby?
Well, yes. I mean, you know, the interest in horse racing waxes and wanes with the times, with major stars coming on to attract attention, like a Zenyatta or a Cigar or Rachel Alexandra or California Chrome, horses like that kind of reach outside the sport into the more general audience. But for the most part, everyone who's involved, who's a sports fan, knows about one horse race, and that is the Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure that it's certainly not the race that stops a nation like the Melbourne Cup. It's not it doesn't have the tradition of let's say the Epsom Derby where it becomes a holiday for an entire community to gather on the downs for that one day. It has become a real corporately oriented promotional opportunity for the Churchill Downs brand and for their bottom line, essentially. So they push every conceivable button and pressure point to maximize their attention and profit during the Derby week, and specifically during the 2 days, the Oaks on Friday and then the Derby on Saturday. And
when did you first go to the race yourself?
Oh, my first Kentucky Derby was 1984. Would have been Spend a Buck. That was in 1985. I'm starting to fade here. Spend a Buck was the front running winner that year. Very exciting. He came out of New Jersey, had won a series of races there, and Angel Cordero put him on the lead, and they never got within a tail's length of him all the way around. Probably the most exciting Derby I saw in person had to have been, I would think, the 1996 version was won by Grindstone in the narrowest possible finish over a California gelding named Cavanier. And I had followed Cavanier quite closely. He was bred in Northern California, not even in the cradles of California breeding, which would be either the Central Valley or the Central Coast. But he was born in wine country, for goodness sakes. He was the product of a couple, Bob and Barbara Walter, who owned a small farm in a Northern California wine country county, and raised right there on the farm and trained on the hillsides alongside the vineyards, and was a real hometown hero. And he did everything but win. It was recognized as the closest finish in the history of the Derby. Grindstone caught him in the far outside in the middle of the track. And for the longest time, no one knew who won until the photo was examined and re-examined. It was tough. The Walters had a portrait of the finish commissioned that hung over their mantle at their home in Sebastopol, California, and the angle is from the inside rail looking up at Cavanier and then Grindstone on the far outside. And anyone seeing that for the first time would, of course, figure that Cavanier won the race, which is fine with me if they would like to remember it that way.
Of course, you allow geldings in the Kentucky Derby as well.
Yes, and I think I don't exactly know if there was a restriction ever on geldings. There was certainly in the Belmont Stakes there was for a number of years. I apologize. I don't know whether or not that same restriction was on our Derby for too long, but there were geldings entered, and it had been a long time between geldings winning the race. I believe something like between 1928 or somewhere in that range until Funnyside won earlier in this century. So it'll happen, and it'll happen again. But still, the preponderance of horses that run are, they're full colts, full males, and with stallion value continuing to be pretty high, I don't think anyone is too anxious to be gelding their young horses before they get a chance at the classics these days.
And looking back at some of the famous winners of the race, just a few that sprung to mind were 1964 with Northern Dancer, who is, say, the grandsire of Galileo, Secretariat in 1973, and Affirmed in 1978 with the Steve Cauthen connection.
Well, those are, if I could have gone back and in my lifetime and been able to have gone to a Kentucky Derby and seen it in person, those would have been three at the very, very top. The Northern Dancer in 1964 was especially near to my heart. As a young fan, I was enamored with a California horse named Hillrise. He was a towering, wonderful, beautiful son of Hillary, and bred in the Central Valley of California, and he won the Santa Anita Derby with one hoof tied behind his back. It was very impressive. He went to Kentucky as good a chance of a West Coast horse winning as any in history, and ridden by Bill Shoemaker. But he came up short to Northern Dancer in a very wily ride by Bill Hartack. He was a very tractable horse, Northern Dancer, not too tall in stature, but built like a Sherman tank. And he was able to put on 2 or 3 moves to hold his position and then get the jump on Hillrise in the deep stretch and held him off. It was heartbreaking for me, but the great satisfaction of Hillrise, and we don't, Northern Dancer didn't race at 4. He went on to being a breed changing stallion, but Hillrise kept going, and he ended up in racing in England 2 seasons later, and won the I believe the Queen Elizabeth II Stakes and became the top weighted miler in England that year. So that was a little bit of a consolation that Hillrise had such a wonderful career after coming so close to winning the Kentucky Derby.
And of course, Steve Cauthen is the only jockey to have won both races, the Derby at Epsom and the Kentucky Derby.
That's true. Who came close, though, was Bill Shoemaker with Hawaiian Sound. That was a remarkable ride he gave that Robert Sangster horse in the 1978 Epsom Derby. Just absolutely was running them off their feet. And the genius of Shoemaker, when he had a horse like Hawaiian Sound, and he put him on a relaxed lead, a front running position. And Shoemaker was so adept in keeping a horse balanced and in perfect stride that even though he'd never gone around Tattenham Corner or gone through the camber in the stretch or anything like that before, he still felt his way around that course and was just barely beaten at the end. So other than Cauthen, I think Shoemaker came the closest of any other jockey to win them both.
Yeah, you've been reading my notes because I put down Steve Cauthen, 3 times champion jockey, only jockey to win the 2 races. Shoemaker second in 1978 when Shirley Heights beat him in the
That's
Derby.
Right. Yeah, was that Greville Starkey, I believe?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And recently you've had some quite dramatic races. Last year's race was run in September, and then in 2019 you had a disqualification in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, we've had some eventful derbies lately. Our derby, the last year, we just kind of have to put a big fat asterisk by a Kentucky Derby run in September. I mean, it was Kentucky Derby in name only. Part of the challenge of the Kentucky Derby is a 3-year-old in May. Simple as that. I mean, and if you don't have your Kentucky Derby in May, it can't be compared to any of the Kentucky Derbies that went before. Certainly Authentic was a legitimate winner of that race on that day, and proved to be a terrific late blooming, mid-season blooming 3-year-old, and champion and horse of the year, rightfully so. The Maximum Security race the year before, that was unfortunate. His jockey lost control of his horse at a key moment. Got him back together again, but it was enough to merit a disqualification on the rules. And you can't use different rules for different races. So it happened in a place in the race where normally a lot of things happen and horses really need to hold their line, and he didn't. So there we are. It's interesting though that over the last 10 winners of the Kentucky Derby, and I'm counting Authentic also, and not counting Maximum Security because he was taken down, but I believe only 2 of them have ever raced past the age of 3, and that's starting to eat into the glamour of the Kentucky Derby, because as a standalone accomplishment, it's tremendous. No, don't get me wrong, but in the past, that winner has carried that title on as a 4-year-old into the handicap and what we call the handicap ranks, but against older horses in the top weight for age, and then meeting the best 3-year-olds of the next generation as a 4-year-old. We don't get that anymore. They're gone, either stud or injury or whatever. And I think that's starting to erode at the edges of the Kentucky Derby's magic a little bit.
And am I right in saying we've had no overseas winners of the race yet?
No, but a horse trained somewhere other than the United States to come here?
Yeah,
Nope.
yeah.
Hadn't happened. A Bold Arrangement, I think, was maybe the closest.
That's 1986,
running second to Ferdinand, and it took a brilliant ride by, what was his name? Shoemaker again, to make that happen. Chris McCarron to this day feels like that's a race that he had in the bag with an eighth of a mile to go, and then here comes that little man Shoemaker on Ferdinand and got through inside, and that was that. But no, that was very exciting, and it shouldn't be a surprise that it was Clive Britton who brought him over, because he had already proven that he could travel with a horse anywhere on the planet and perform. It was a very, very exciting Derby.
Yeah, this is Bold Arrangement, who was trained by Clive Britton in Newmarket, and had actually, I read, had a trial race in the Bluegrass Stakes before the Kentucky Derby.
Correct, and he knew what he was doing. That was the right thing to do to get him acclimated to an American crowd and the American course. And the Bluegrass in those days was, if not the prime indicator of success in the Derby, certainly on a par with the Wood Memorial or the Santa Anita Derby. It was only, for many years, it was run 10 days out from the Kentucky Derby. And it was used as like the final, proving ground for horses that were getting really, screwed down tight for that first Saturday in May. Now the Bluegrass is just one of many races run 3 or 4 weeks out from the Derby, and it sort of gets lost in the shuffle, and it just depends on who shows up. This year, of course, with Elusive Quality winning the Bluegrass in a very good race, a very fast race. Last year's 2-year-old champion, Colt. The Bluegrass could have quite a bit of significance. The runner-up, highly motivated, was quite good in defeat. So they'll both be certainly the winner will be well backed in the Derby this year, and the runner-up will get a lot of attention because he comes from the Chad Brown stable.
In the race, is the gate draw important? Because you've got 20 runners normally.
Well, no question. And it in the past, what was interesting last year was that for the first time, a 20-stall gate was introduced. They had it specially manufactured for the Kentucky Derby. It seems like 20 horses, at least to be entered, is mandated any longer, which is too bad. But it's highly encouraged. Close track is kept for the top 20 in qualifying points, and so you're guaranteed to have that 20-horse stampede, or perhaps 19 or 18, depending on late scratches. Whereas in the a little more distant past, there'd be like 14-horse fields, 15, 12 sometimes. There wouldn't be the push to be one among 20. It would be more a merit-based system of, do you really think you have a horse that deserves to run in the Kentucky Derby? And that's it becomes a subtle promotional point, a motivational point. But now, I mean, you could have the most lightly raced or lightly accomplished horse who, for some reason, has acquired the 20th most points, and man, you're on a van and you're there no matter what, simply because, well, I'm one of the 20 now. That doesn't seem to be the best way to find the best of the class of that particular foal crop, but that's what we're faced with. At any rate, they did finally, after many years of using a 14-stall gate, complemented by a 6-stall, I believe, auxiliary gate that were jammed together with a coupling that made for an odd spacing between stalls 14 and 15. And those two horses would always come together at the start because of the gap there. It was a righteous mess. And they finally, with all the money that Churchill Downs is rolling in because of the Kentucky Derby and the Oaks promotions, they've had manufactured specially a solid 20-horse stall. It looked great. I can't remember how many were in the field last year. I think it was maybe like 17 or so, but they did employ the gate, and it looked great. It was a fair, clean start. The angle that the inside horse has to come at is a little awkward because you kind of have to bear outward slightly to make the straightaway down the stretch the first time. So there's by its nature a lot of squeezing and jockeying for position early. But for the most part, the post position can affect horses who only perhaps have one way that they can go. If they're not versatile enough or handy enough to get some kind of a viable position for what they can do, then they could be compromised by the draw. But I think it's more ceremonial fuss than is really it really applies.
And you mentioned the favourite, Essential Quality. He was the leading 2-year-old last year.
Yes, he's certainly done nothing wrong this year. Won both of his races. Last one wasn't. He didn't win by a lot, but he won impressively and efficiently, and like a real racehorse. He's flying the Godolphin flag, so that'll be interesting to see if they can, after all the years spent on horses coming over from the Middle East, to try to win the Kentucky Derby, either homebreds or purchase at the last minute or this or that. This is just one of their American string with Brad Cox, and he developed him into a champion 2-year-old, and here we are that he's translating his form into H3. But by no means will he be an overwhelming choice. There are at least I'd say 3 others that will get a lot of attention. Certainly, Todd Pletcher is going to he's going to have 3 or 4 horses in the field anyway, and he's already won the Derby twice, so he knows what he's doing. And he has known Agenda, the Florida Derby, very impressive Florida Derby winner, in the race. Then there's the Santa Anita Derby winner, Rock Your World, son of Candy Ride, who absolutely humbled his field in the Santa Anita Derby in only the 3rd start of his life. So that's where a lot of most of the attention will drift. Hot Rod Charlie is kind of underneath those. He's a very consistent horse who almost threw a scare into Essential Quality, exclusive quality last year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he came back to have a good prep race, and then won in Louisiana quite impressively. So, it's a good mix at the top. There's no standout, but there's half a dozen quality horses that really deserve attention.
And Wesley Ward, who's very well known to us winning races at Royal Ascot virtually every year, he's got a runner in the race as well, hasn't he?
He does, coming off a synthetic surface. So it's hard to take horses like that seriously, although Animal Kingdom did come off both a grass race and a synthetic surface to win 10 years ago. So it has been done, and it'd be good to see Wesley in the Derby. He always makes for good copy, and his horses are always well meant. It's a great variety this year. I'd say, as in most years, half the field truly belongs, and the other half will be there for the big day. Good for their people for giving it a shot, but let's hope they don't get in the way.
And Wesley's horse is called Like the King. So have you got your own tip and a best outsider for our podcast for the race?
Well, that's not my job, Stephen. I have the advantage of my work is always takes place afterwards, and I get to tell everyone why they were wrong. No, I have an affinity, certainly toward Rock Your World. His breeders are some dear friends and absolute institutions in California. The trainer Ron McAnally and his wife Debbie have a very small but very select broodmare band that was actually nurtured in Ireland with Coolmore, and where the taproot mare stood. Had her foals for the first couple of years, and then her daughters have gone on to produce some wonderful stakes winners for the McAnally family, and they sent this particular colt, a son of Candy Ride, to market last year and got 2 years ago as a yearling, got $650,000 for their trouble, which was a pretty fair price for a son of Candy Ride out of a Group 1 placed mare. And here he is. 3 starts later, he's probably the second choice in the Kentucky Derby. And then, of course, Candy Ride is our house horse. Julie rode him to win the Pacific Classic for Ron McAnally, and certainly one of the great moments in her career, and a pretty good day in our family too. That was a lot of fun. So I'm rooting for the son of Candy Ride.
I can see why. And there'll be crowds there this year.
Yes, there will. I believe. They've changed the numbers a couple of times. I think it's around 20 or 25% of what they consider capacity. I don't know what number they're using. I mean, they've announced crowds of 150,000 at the Kentucky Derby in the past because they packed them into the infield and standing room. So I don't know. I mean, it'll be a far cry from last September when the Derby was basically run in silence with a handful of owners and media clattering around in that big barn of a building. It'll sound like a fair sporting event this time around. That's for sure.
And where will you be watching the race yourself?
Right here in Southern California. Probably go to one of the local off-track betting sites, or maybe even go to Santa Anita. I was there in 2014. I was at Santa Anita with my daughter to watch California Chrome win the Kentucky Derby, and we were watching it inside in one of the nice betting halls that they have there in front of the huge television screen, surrounded by people. It was so much fun to be surrounded by people. We used to do that. But the noise, the sound that was made by that intensely partisan Southern California crowd to watch their hero, California Chrome, take the Derby. The only sound that I can compare it to would be standing next to a jet engine. I mean, it was shattering. I had to put my hands over my little girl's ears in precaution. But and that's what the Derby can do to you. I mean, it truly is. It can be a very emotional experience. It's such an American institution, not just a sporting institution, but an American institution, and it has survived a lot. It has survived, disasters of injuries. It has survived controversies of the medication disqualification from more than 50 years ago to the on-track disqualification of just a couple of years ago. So there's been enough controversy and enough disappointments to fill a history book. But at the end of the day, it's that intensity of those 2 minutes that stick with you for a long time, especially if you've either tabbed the winner or you have some sort of emotional attachment.
Well, let's hope it's a great race again on Saturday, the 1st of May, the same day as the 2,000 Guineas is run at Newmarket. And also in 2022, there's 150,000 people rocking at Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Derby. Thank you very much, Jay, for being on the Paddock and the Pavilion and letting us know all about the Kentucky Derby and your tip for the race on the 1st of May.
Stephen, it's been a real privilege, and I enjoy your work very much. Keep it up, and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Paddock and the Pavilion. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and now on Instagram at the Pad and Pav. Don't forget, if you like the show, please do leave us a rating and review.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
For Mervis Diamond Importers, I'm Ronnie Mervis. I was raised near the diamond mines in South Africa, and like every Mervis, diamonds are in my DNA. The history of diamonds in Africa and of the Mervis family run together. As kids, my brothers Kenny, Zed, and I rode our bikes on the mine dumps. At night, we'd listen to my father talk about the diamond mines. Today, Mervis still operates in Africa. This gives Mervis Diamonds the advantage. We import the finest diamonds, cutting out the middleman, so you save. Mervis Diamonds are amongst the best in the world. And now they're available for less than you think. Mervis Diamond Importers. It's like going to the mines yourself without getting dirty. Mervis Diamond Importers. Mervis means more diamonds, much better quality, and the most value. Mervis is the ringleader for the latest engagement rings and wedding bands. Easy financing is available. For an appointment, go to mervisdiamond.com or call 800-HER-LOVE. That's mervisdiamond.com or 800-HER-LOVE.